The shadow behind success. The rain drummed against the windows of their cramped studio apartment as Victoria Chun carefully stirred the instant noodles, adding the last egg from their nearly empty refrigerator. Across the room, Marcus Blackwood, hunched over his laptop, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled papers, his eyes bloodshot from another 18-hour coding session. "Marcus, you need to eat something," Victoria said softly, setting the steaming bowl beside his keyboard. She'd been saying the same thing for months now, watching him pour every ounce of himself into his startup, while she worked double shifts at the local coffee shop to keep them afloat. He barely looked up, mumbling a distracted thanks before returning to his screen. Victoria studied his profile in the blue glow of the monitor, the sharp jawline she'd fallen in love with 3 years ago, now shadowed with stubble and exhaustion. She believed in his vision, even when the venture capitalists didn't, even when their bank account hit zero, even when her own dreams of becoming a recognized artist seemed to fade further into the background. "The Peterson meeting went well today," Marcus said suddenly, his fingers still flying across the keyboard. "They're interested in a second round of funding." Victoria's face lit up. "Marcus, that's incredible. I knew they'd see what I see in you." For the first time in hours, he turned to look at her, really look at her. Victoria's dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, paint still smudged on her fingertips from the canvas she'd abandoned to make him dinner. She wore one of his old t-shirts over paint-stained jeans, but her eyes sparkled with genuine pride and excitement for his success. "We might actually make it, Vic," he said, reaching for her hand. "All those late nights, all the ramen dinners. It's going to be worth it." 6 months later, Marcus's company had secured $15 million in funding. Their cramped studio was replaced by a sleek penthouse overlooking the city. Victoria's thrift store clothes gave way to designer pieces. Marcus insisted she needed for the business events they now attended weekly, but something had shifted. At the first major tech conference where Marcus was invited as a keynote speaker, Victoria stood beside him in a borrowed dress, watching him network with investors and industry leaders. When someone asked about her, Marcus would smile politely and say, "This is Victoria, my girlfriend," before quickly steering the conversation back to his company's growth metrics. Tonight was different, though. Tonight was the annual Tech Innovators Gala, and Marcus had been nominated for Entrepreneur of the Year. Victoria had spent hours getting ready, choosing an elegant black dress that made her feel confident and beautiful. She'd even brought along a small clutch containing business cards for her art. Maybe tonight would be the night she could finally talk about her own dreams. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and success stories. Victoria smiled politely as Marcus introduced her to a parade of investors, each conversation following the same pattern. They'd shake her hand with mild interest before turning their full attention to Marcus, discussing valuations and market penetration while she stood silently beside them, invisible in plain sight. "And who might this lovely lady be?" asked a distinguished man in an expensive suit, extending his hand to Victoria. Marcus barely glanced her way. "Oh, that's just Victoria." "Victoria, this is James Peterson from Peterson Ventures, the firm I was telling you about. Just Victoria." The words hit her like ice water, but she maintained her smile, shaking Peterson's hand while Marcus launched into his practice ditch. She wasn't his partner who'd believed in him when no one else would. She wasn't the woman who'd sacrificed her own artistic pursuits to support his dreams. She was just Victoria, an afterthought, a shadow trailing behind his spotlight dot. As the evening wore on, Victoria found herself standing alone by the windows. Watching the city lights blur through tears, she refused to let fall dot the breaking point 3 months after the gala. Victoria stood in the corner of the Meridian Gallery, watching Marcus charm a circle of tech executives while her own paintings hung unnoticed on the walls behind them. Emma Rodriguez, the gallery owner, had given Victoria this opportunity a small section in a group exhibition featuring emerging artists. It was her first real showing in 2 years. "The brushwork in this piece is quite remarkable," said a voice beside her. Victoria turned to see James Hartford, the city's most respected art critic, studying her largest canvas, a swirling abstract piece she'd titled Invisible Frequencies. Her heart raced. "Thank you. I'm Victoria Chun, the artist." James nodded, thoughtfully making notes in his small leather journal. "There's raw emotion here, something authentic. The way you've captured isolation within chaos, it's compelling." For the first time in months, Victoria felt seen. They discussed her techniques, her inspirations, the months of late-night painting sessions in their penthouse while Marcus worked in his office. James seemed genuinely interested, asking about her artistic journey and the stories behind each piece. "I'd like to write about your work," James said finally. "There's something here worth exploring further." Victoria could barely contain her excitement. A review from James Hartford could change everything. As he walked away, she felt a warm hand on her shoulder. "Sophie." Victoria embraced her older sister, who'd driven 3 hours from Sacramento to attend the opening. "I'm so proud of you, Vic. These paintings are incredible." Sophie's eyes sparkled as she examined each piece. "You've found your voice again." "James Hartford wants to review my work," Victoria whispered, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "Victoria!" Marcus's voice cut through their conversation. He strode over with his usual confident smile, but his eyes held an edge she'd learned to recognize. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." He glanced dismissively at the paintings. "Nice hobby pieces. Very ... colorful." The way he said it made Victoria's stomach clench. "Actually, they're quite sophisticated," Sophie interjected coolly. "Victoria's always been incredibly talented." Marcus barely acknowledged Sophie's comment. "Victoria, I need you to meet David Chun from Velocity Capital. He's interested in our Series B funding round." "Your funding round," Victoria corrected quietly. "And I was just talking to—" "This is important, Vic. Way more important than this little art thing." Marcus's words hung in the air like a slap. Sophie's face darkened. "This little art thing?" "Marcus, this is her first major exhibition." "Look, Sophie, I appreciate the family support, but Victoria and I have real responsibilities now. Adult responsibilities." Marcus turned to Victoria with that patronizing smile she'd grown to hate. "Come on, let's go mingle with people who actually matter." Something inside Victoria finally snapped. The months of being dismissed, overlooked, treated like an accessory to Marcus's success, it all crystallized in that moment. James Hartford, a respected critic, had seen value in her work. Her sister believed in her talent. But the man she'd supported through his darkest moments couldn't even pretend to care about her dreams. "No," she said quietly. Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. "What?" I said no. I'm staying here with my work. With people who actually see me." His face flushed with embarrassment as nearby guests began to notice their conversation. "Victoria, don't be ridiculous. You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself?" Her voice grew stronger. "You just called my art a little thing in front of everyone. You introduced me to investors as just Victoria. When exactly did I become nothing to you, Marcus?" The gallery had grown quieter, conversations tapering off as people sensed the tension. Marcus grabbed her arm, his grip firm enough to hurt. "We're leaving now." Victoria pulled away, her voice carrying across the gallery. "No, we're not. You can leave if you want, but I'm staying with my work, with my art, with the things that apparently don't matter to you anymore." Marcus's face went white with rage and humiliation. For a moment, Victoria thought he might apologize, might remember who they used to be together. Instead, he leaned close and whispered with cold precision, "Fine. Stay with your amateur paintings and your delusions. But don't expect me to support this fantasy anymore." He straightened his tie and walked toward the exit, pausing only to flash a charming smile at David Chun. "Sorry about that. You know how emotional artists can get." Victoria stood frozen as the gallery buzzed with whispered conversations. Sophie appeared at her side immediately, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders. "Are you okay?" Sophie asked gently. Victoria watched Marcus disappear through the gallery doors, probably heading to some exclusive bar where he'd spin this story to make himself the victim. She thought about their empty penthouse, about the life they'd built. That had somehow become entirely his. "No," she said finally, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "But I think I'm going to be." That night, Victoria packed a single suitcase while Marcus slept in his office, as he did most nights now. She left no note, no explanation, just her key on the kitchen counter and the engagement ring he'd given her 6 months ago. When his success had made him feel generous enough to make promises he'd never intended to keep. By sunrise, she was in Sophie's car, driving toward a life she'd have to build entirely on her own terms. The transformation Victoria's hands trembled as she mixed cerulean blue with titanium white on her palette, the colors swirling together like storm clouds over ocean. 3 months had passed since she'd left Marcus and the penthouse, and she was finally beginning to remember who she'd been before she'd lost herself in his shadow. Sophie's spare bedroom had become her studio, canvases propped against every available wall surface. The morning light streamed through the east-facing window, illuminating her latest piece, a series she'd titled Reclamation. Each painting explored a different aspect of rediscovering herself, her voice, her dreams, her worth. "You're up early again," Sophie said, appearing in the doorway with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. She'd been Victoria's lifeline these past months, never once making her feel like a burden despite the cramped living situation. "I couldn't sleep. This piece keeps calling to me." Victoria gestured toward the canvas she'd been working on since Foray May, a self-portrait emerging from fragments of mirror, each reflection showing a different version of herself. Sophie studied the painting thoughtfully. "It's powerful, Vic. You're painting with a freedom I haven't seen since college." A knock at the front door interrupted them. Sophie frowned. It was barely 8 a.m. on a Saturday. Through the window, Victoria glimpsed a tall man with silver-streaked hair wearing a paint-splattered denim jacket. "David Kim," Sophie breathed, recognizing him immediately. "What's he doing here?" David Kim was a legend in the art world, a painter whose works hung in the Metropolitan Museum, whose sculptures graced public spaces in major cities worldwide. Victoria had studied his techniques in art school, never imagining she'd someday meet him. Sophie opened the door cautiously. "Mr. Kim? Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Victoria Chun," David said in a gentle voice tinged with a slight Korean accent. "James Hartford gave me this address. Sighed I might find something extraordinary here." Victoria's heart pounded. James had published his review 2 weeks ago, a glowing piece that called her work a raw exploration of identity and resilience that demands attention. But she'd never expected it to reach someone like David Kim. "I'm Victoria," she managed. Stepping forward, David's eyes lit up as he spotted the paintings visible through the doorway. "May I see your work?" James described pieces that, frankly, I had to witness myself. For the next hour, David moved through Sophie's small apartment like he was touring the Louvre, examining each painting with intense focus. He studied her brushstrokes, asked about her color choices, listened intently as Victoria explained the emotions behind each piece. "This one," he said, stopping before a painting she'd titled The Weight of Silence, a figure dissolving into background noise while vibrant. Life continued around her. "This captures something essential about invisibility, about being present but unseen. Victoria nodded, her throat tight. I painted it after realizing I'd spent years disappearing into someone else's life. David turned to her with sharp, knowing eyes. Art born from genuine experience always carries the most power. Victoria, I'd like to propose something. I'm starting a mentorship program for artists who have something important to say. Would you be interested? Victoria stared at him, certain she'd misheard. David Kim wanted to mentor her? Ah, yes. Absolutely yes. Over the following weeks, Victoria threw herself into her art with renewed passion. David visited twice a week, challenging her techniques, pushing her to dig deeper into her emotional landscape. Under his guidance, her work evolved from good to extraordinary. You're holding back, David observed during one session, watching Victoria work on a piece about breaking free from gilded pages. Your brushstrokes are too careful, too polite. What are you afraid of? I don't know. Making mistakes? Not being good enough? Mistakes are where the magic happens. And Victoria, you are more than good enough. You just need to believe it. That afternoon, Rachel Stone knocked on Sophie's door. A social media strategist who specialized in artists, Rachel had seen Victoria's work at a small coffee shop exhibition and wanted to help build her online presence. Your story is compelling, Rachel explained, scrolling through photos of Victoria's paintings on her tablet. Woman leaves successful life to rediscover herself through art. It's authentic, it's relatable, and your work is genuinely beautiful. Within weeks, Rachel had transformed Victoria's online presence. Instagram posts showing her painting process gained thousands of followers. Art blogs began featuring her work. Gallery owners started reaching out. Look at this, Sophie said one evening, showing Victoria her phone. 20,000 likes on that video of you working on Phoenix Rising. Victoria studied the comments flooding in from around the world, people sharing their own stories of reinvention, of finding themselves after losing their way. Her art was resonating with others who'd felt invisible, overlooked, diminished. It's working, Rachel confirmed during their weekly call. 3 galleries have inquired about solo exhibitions. And Victoria? There's something else. The Modern Contemporary Museum wants to meet with you about their Emerging Artists program. At night, Victoria stood before her bathroom mirror, studying her reflection. Her hair was longer now, loose waves framing a face that looked different, somehow more alive, more present. Paint perpetually stained her fingernails, and she'd developed new laugh lines from actually laughing again. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw your interview in Art Weekly. Impressive how quickly you've gained attention. Hope you're not getting too full of yourself. Victoria stared at Marcus's message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. His opinion no longer had the power to diminish her light. She picked up her brush and returned to her easel, where a new painting awaited, one that would capture not who she'd been, but who she was becoming. The recognition the morning sun cast. Long shadows across the marble floors of the Modern Contemporary Museum as Victoria stood before the largest canvas she'd ever created. Metamorphosis stretched 12 feet across, depicting a figure shedding layers of gray conformity to reveal brilliant colors beneath gold, crimson, and deep purple flowing like liquid fire. It's breathtaking, whispered Olivia Grant, the museum's chief curator, as she made final adjustments to the lighting. This piece alone justifies the entire exhibition. Victoria's solo show, Invisible No More, was opening tonight. 6 months of intensive work under David's mentorship had culminated in this moment. 23 paintings that chronicled her journey from shadow to spotlight, each piece more powerful than the last. The critics are already buzzing, Rachel sighed, checking her phone as she coordinated with the museum's media team. The Times wants an exclusive interview after tonight's opening. Victoria nodded, though her stomach churned with nerves. The guest list read like a who's who of the art world collectors, critics, gallery owners, and established artists she'd only dreamed of meeting. But it wasn't the prestigious names that made her anxious. It was the possibility that Marcus might show up. "He won't come," Sophie said, reading her sister's expression as she arrived with a garment bag. "He's too proud to admit he was wrong about your talent." But Victoria knew Marcus better than that. His ego couldn't tolerate being excluded from anything that generated this much attention, especially when it involved the woman he'd dismissed as irrelevant dot. As afternoon melted into evening, the museum transformed. Servers arranged elegant canapes, while bartenders prepared signature cocktails named after Victoria's paintings. The Phoenix Rising was a golden drink that sparkled like liquid sunrise, while the Weight of Silence was a deep blue concoction that seemed to shift colors in the light. Victoria stood in the museum's private room, adjusting the flowing emerald. Dress Sophie had helped her choose a far cry from the borrowed gowns she'd worn to Marcus's tech events. This dress was hers, chosen because it made her feel powerful and authentic. "Ready?" David appeared in the doorway, elegant in his signature black jacket. Over the months, he'd become more than a mentor. He was the father figure she'd never had, someone who believed in her potential, even when she couldn't see it herself. The opening was everything Victoria had dreamed and more. Thomas Reed, a legendary collector whose acquisitions could make careers, spent 40 minutes studying her reclamation series. James Hartford introduced her to influential gallery owners from New York and Los Angeles. Young art students approached her with shy reverence, sharing how her work had inspired them to pursue their own authentic voices. Victoria Chun, a woman with perfectly styled silver hair, extended her hand. "I'm Catherine Mills from the National Arts Foundation. We'd like to discuss a grant opportunity for your next project." Victoria felt like she was floating through a dream. Every conversation validated years of struggle. Every compliment felt like sunlight after a long winter. She was discussing technique with established artists, debating interpretation with critics, being treated as an equal in spaces where she'd once felt invisible. "Excuse me." The familiar voice cut through her conversation with a prominent gallery director. Victoria turned to find Marcus standing behind her, impeccably dressed in his signature navy suit, holding a glass of champagne he clearly hadn't paid for. The Phoenix soars. 2 years later, Victoria stood on the balcony of her downtown loft, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of amber and rose. Her studio took up the entire top floor, windows facing east to catch the morning light that had become essential to her creative process. Canvases lined the walls, some finished pieces waiting for pickup by collectors, others works in progress that called to her at all hours. Her phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "The Times piece is live. Prepare for your inbox to explode." Victoria smiled, opening the article on her phone. Victoria Chun, the artist who painted her way to freedom, featured a full-color spread of her latest series, Unbound, alongside photos of her working in the studio. The writer had captured something essential about her journey, not just the dramatic story of leaving wealth behind, but the deeper transformation of a woman who'd learned to value herself. The success still felt surreal sometimes. 3 sold out. Solo exhibitions, pieces in major collections, a waiting list of commissions that stretched 18 months out. More importantly, letters arrived weekly from people who'd seen themselves in her work, women who'd found courage to leave diminishing relationships, artists who'd rediscovered their voices, anyone who'd ever felt invisible learning to step into their own light. "Knock, knock," Sophie's voice called from the studio entrance. She'd driven down from Sacramento for Victoria's latest opening tonight, a group exhibition featuring contemporary women artists at the prestigious Hartwell Gallery. "Look at this space," Sophie marveled, spinning slowly to take in the high ceilings and natural light. Remember when you were painting in my spare bedroom? Victoria laughed, wrapping her sister in a hug. I remember you never once complained, even when I took over your entire apartment. That's what family does. We see each other's potential, even when we can't see it ourselves. David arrived an hour later for their weekly mentoring session. Though their relationship had evolved beyond teacher and student, he reviewed her latest work with the critical eye that had pushed her to excellence. But his feedback now came from a place of deep respect for her artistic vision. This new piece, he said, studying a canvas she'd finished the night before. There's a lightness here I haven't seen in your earlier work. Less anger, more joy. Victoria nodded. I think I'm finally painting from a place of wholeness instead of healing from brokenness. The afternoon flew by in preparation for the evening's opening. Rachel coordinated media interviews while Victoria selected jewelry that complemented her midnight blue dress, not because someone else expected her to look a certain way, but because she wanted to feel elegant and confident representing her work. The Harkwell Gallery buzzed with energy as the evening began. Victoria's pieces held prominent positions throughout the space, and she moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. Collectors greeted her warmly, critics discussed her evolution as an artist, and younger painters sought her advice with the same reverence she'd once felt approaching David. Victoria! Thomas Reed approached with a distinguished woman Victoria didn't recognize. I'd like you to meet Elena Vasquez, director of the Venice Biennale Selection Committee. Victoria's breath caught. The Venice Biennale was considered the Olympics of the art world, and being selected to represent your country was the highest honor an artist could receive. Ms. Chun, Elena said with a slight Spanish accent, I've been following your work since your first museum show. We're considering American artists for next year's exhibition, and your Invisible No More series has generated considerable discussion among our committee. They talked for 20 minutes about Victoria's artistic journey, her techniques, her vision for future work. Elena's questions were probing but respectful, clearly coming from someone who understood both the technical and emotional aspects of creating meaningful art. We'll be in touch within the month, Elena said finally, shaking Victoria's hand with a firm grip that suggested serious intention. As Elena walked away, Victoria felt a familiar presence behind her. She turned to find Marcus standing awkwardly near the entrance, scanning the crowd until his eyes found hers. He looked older somehow, his usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. Victoria excused herself from her conversation and walked over, curious rather than anxious about what he might say. Victoria, he began, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. I wanted to congratulate you on all of this. He gestured vaguely at the gallery, the crowd, the obvious success surrounding her. Thank you, she said simply, waiting. I've been following your career. The museum acquisitions, the critical acclaim. I realize now that I was... He paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. I was wrong about your talent, about your potential, about what you are capable of. Victoria studied, his face searching for traces of the man she'd once loved enough to sacrifice her dreams for. You weren't wrong about my potential, Marcus. You just couldn't see it because you needed me to be smaller so you could feel bigger. He flinched at her directness but didn't deny it. I heard about the Venice Biennale possibility. That's incredible, Victoria. You deserve that recognition. I know I do, she said without arrogance, simply stating a fact she'd learned to believe about herself. Marcus nodded slowly, perhaps finally understanding that she no longer needed his validation to feel worthy. I should go. I just wanted you to know that I see you now. I see what I missed. I'm glad you can see me, Victoria replied gently. But I've learned that the most important thing is seeing myself. After he left, Victoria returned to the celebration, but her mind kept drifting to their conversation. There was no satisfaction in his acknowledgement, no sense of vindication or triumph. His recognition of her worth felt as irrelevant as his earlier dismissal had been devastating. She'd traveled so far beyond needing his approval that his opinion, positive or negative, simply didn't matter anymore. "You look thoughtful," David observed, joining her near her largest piece in the exhibition. "Marcus was here. He wanted to congratulate me, to admit he was wrong about my abilities." David raised an eyebrow. "And how did that feel?" Victoria considered the question. "Like listening to someone comment on a person I used to be. His opinion doesn't touch who I am." Now, as the evening wound down, Victoria found herself surrounded by Sophie, David, Rachel, and Olivia, the people who'd believed in her when she'd forgotten how to believe in herself. They shared stories and laughter, planning future projects, and dreaming bigger dreams. Driving home alone through the quiet city streets, Victoria caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at her was radiant with purpose, her eyes bright with the satisfaction of living authentically. This was what it looked like to be seen, truly seen, starting with seeing herself clearly. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena Vasquez. The committee was unanimous. "Expect our official invitation tomorrow. Welcome to Venice." Victoria pulled over, tears of joy streaming down her face. Not because the selection validated her worth. She'd learned her value didn't depend on external recognition, but because it represented the ultimate symbol of how far she'd traveled from the shadows into her own magnificent light. The phoenix had risen, not in revenge or spite, but in the pure joy of finally knowing her own wings could carry her anywhere she dared. To soar,